Shout out to Snowball, our incredible new sponsor, a private community where top entrepreneur investors share private deal flow, wins, tough lessons, strategies, get advice, and so much more. Check out www.snowballclub.com. Let's grow together with Snowball. Hello, and welcome to the How to Exit podcast, where we introduce you to a world of small to medium business acquisitions and mergers. We interview business owners, industry leaders, authors, mentors, and other influencers with the sole intent to share with you what it looks like to buy or sell a business. Let's get rolling. And now a moment for our sponsors. I want to highly recommend you get Acquisition Aficionado magazine. Every month, Acquisition Aficionado magazine brings you tactics for business buying and selling you won't find anywhere else. Learn firsthand from industry leaders who share their success stories, featuring in-depth interviews and stories from leading figures in the business acquisition industry. This multi-platform mobile magazine speaks to acquisition entrepreneurs wherever they are in the journey. And I want you to visit acquisitionaficionado.com today. Hello and welcome to the How to Exit podcast. Today I'm here with Mike Moyer. He's the author of Slicing Pie and We'll Work for Pie and a few other books. He's a award-winning speaker. And if you've watched our show much, you know that I recommend this book often. So I'm thrilled to learn from you today. I'm thrilled to have you here. Thank you for being here. And we look forward to learning all about slicing pie and the other knowledge you have.
Thanks for having me. I'm really happy to be on the show.
Cool. Let's just start with your origin story. Kind of who are you? What got you into this space? And then we'll talk about lead into why slicing pie. What made you write such a book, and what made you create such a platform?
Well, my origin story is probably like most entrepreneurs. I did startup stuff when I was a kid. I sold rabbits and things like that. And then I got to college and didn't do very well. And my parents said, "Why don't you come home and get a job instead of going to college because you're not doing very well?" But I said, "I don't want to do that." So I started a company in college making T-shirts for fraternities and sororities. And then I grew that into some light manufacturing and finished college and ran that through graduate school. And I sold it after I graduated from graduate school. So it paid for my whole college. And I kind of got the entrepreneurship bug from that. And for the next 10 years, I went from startup job to real job to startup job to real job. I've worked in everything from vacuum cleaners to motorhome chassis to fine wine. I did some works in some wineries in California for a couple of years. I've worked in senior living communities and fishing tackle boxes. I've just worked in a variety of different businesses. And every time I started a company in the veterinary business, veterinary marketing business when I was in graduate school. And every time I started a company, even as a side hustle or a real company, I struggled with this equity split issue. And I relied heavily on people who were more experienced than me because I figured they knew what it was. And I relied heavily on lawyers because I figured they knew what they're talking about. And I started a company in 2006, and we raised $5 million on a half-written business plan and a PowerPoint deck. And that company grew and grew, and I was there for a few years before I left, and that triggered my stock options as per my contract. But there was one line in the operating agreement that said that if I left the company, even if my shares vested fully, they could buy them back at share par value, at market value. At the time, it was zero because they were underwater. So he bought the shares back for next to nothing and sold them for millions. And it was perfectly legal. I had read it, I agreed to it, but I realized that just because it's legal doesn't make it fair. Fair and legal aren't the same thing. And I started questioning, what does fair mean? I thought I had some ideas about it. And I originally wrote Slicing Pie as kind of a hacker's guide to equitable deal, fair dealing with partners. And I wrote a white paper in 2009, 2008, and started distributing it to people, and they really liked the concept. And I wrote the first book in 2010 called Slicing Pie, and I did a couple of iterations on that. And then I wrote Slicing Pie Handbook in 2015, which was basically started as a user guide to my software because people kept asking for software. And then I wrote Will Work for Pie a couple of years ago. And what I've learned over time is the books cover a lot of things about kind of a hacker's guide, tweak this, change that, however you want. But I realized that it's based on a universal foundation of logic. And so it doesn't need to be altered or changed from the basic format of slicing pie. So today I spend a lot of time on slicing pie software and do a lot of talks. I'm going to University of Kansas next week. I'm going to Barcelona the week next month. So I do a lot of speaking events, and I manage. I do a lot of consultations for equity splits, and I also run a company called Mosquito Aces that makes pop-up mosquito net tents for Boy Scout camps, which is a side hustle my son and I started when he was a Boy Scout, and I teach at Northwestern University, and so I'm a typical scatterbrain entrepreneur.
Can you explain the concept of slicing pie model and how it differs from the equity distribution methods?
So there's two ways of splitting equity in this world. There's the fair slicing pie way, and there's literally everything else. So the best way to understand slicing pie is by thinking of an analogy of the game of like a gamble, like blackjack. Do you know how to play blackjack?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Let's pretend that you and I are going to play blackjack together as a team, not opponents, but as a team. We're playing on the same hand. And we're going to split the winnings 50-50 because we're friends. So we'll fist bump on it. So we go to the table and we each put $1 on the same hand of blackjack. We don't know if we're going to win. We don't know how much we're going to win or how long it's going to take to win. The future is unknown. We cannot predict the future. What we know for certain, though, is that we each bet $1. So the dealer deals two aces. So when in blackjack, you split the aces and double down. But I'm out of cash and you're not. So you put $2 more down. So you bet $3 and I've only bet $1. We still don't know if we're going to win or how much we're going to win or how long it's going to take to win. What we know for certain, though, is you bet 3 and I bet 1. If we win, does our original deal for 50-50 sound fair?
Not really, right? Like, not unless you do recoup your expenses first,
It should be
right?
75% for you and 25% for me. Your share of the winnings, logically, obviously, unambiguously, should reflect your share of the bets. And if you think about a startup, it's exactly the same thing. You're basically gambling your money, and you contribute to startups. And if you're not paid, you're essentially betting on the future outcome of the company. You bet time and money and facilities and supplies and relationships and equipment and ideas. Every time you bet and you're not paid, you're betting exactly the fair market value of that contribution. You can't bet more than that because you're not a magical leprechaun, are you?
No, not that I
No.
know of.
Just
I
checking.
haven't figured that one out yet.
You never know these days. But you're also not a slave. So all you can bet is what you're worth. You can't bet more or less than that. So one thing that people often overlook is that everything in business is quantifiable. The headphones on your head are quantifiable. The curtain behind you, the microphone, you paid for those things, didn't you? You didn't steal them. And you
Right.
can find a receipt, you can quantify it. Your time is quantifiable. Everything's quantifiable. So because we can know the amounts exactly, we can tell people bet. And by based on the bets, we can tell what the equity split should be. And with that, that's universal logic for fairness. And the other way of doing it is just stick with our 50-50 deal. We had a deal for 50-50. I could sue you and probably win, but just because we agreed to it doesn't make it fair. So every other method is about guessing the future, rules of thumb. It's not, it doesn't have the discipline behind just using the bets on the table. It's like a blackjack.
It's interesting because what appealed to me is in my lifetime, I've created multiple startups, and most of them up until recently, until I found your book, was some form of, split, right? It wasn't always 50-50. Sometimes it was more than that, depending on who had more time and energy and stuff. But it never seemed fair when it got into the weeds of things because, for one, I'm a typical, at least in my youth, I was a big workaholic. So I would put in the extra hours and solve the problems and stay there. And I felt very often, I felt like I was the guy pulling 60-hour weeks when the other guy would pull 20 or 30. And how is this working? Or sometimes it was, intellectual, right? You're the guy solving all the problems, you're the guy bringing the majority of it. And the other people end up taking worker bee roles. And it's like, how is this equal? Right? You overvalued their ability to complete task and their knowledge level. And so I love the slicing pie model because it breaks everything down,
I call it
right?
you have what's called the fix and fight method. Whatever your equity is expressed as a percentage, that's called a fixed split. It's basically set on stone or on paper. And the only way to change it when you realize it's wrong is to renegotiate, which is painful. No one wants to give it up. And what you experienced was things didn't go as planned. We didn't predict the future properly. If you could predict the future, you wouldn't need a slicing pie because you wouldn't use equity because you wouldn't start anything that had a chance of failure. The only reason you use equity is you think it might fail. So when you realize it's wrong, you have to find about it later on, and it causes a lot of turmoil.
And sometimes you end up giving people more equity because you just need the team around you.
Yeah.
When if with the slicing pie model, they're earning their worth. They're basically There's a certain amount per hour, there's a certain amount per dollar they put in, and, it just seems to work. I haven't heard anybody that I've given the book that actually followed it, that comes back and says, "This isn't working. Why are we doing this?" Right?
Yeah, I mean, neither. In 10 years, hundreds of thousands of books, and I've talked to thousands of startups. I've never heard it backfire unless they change it. If they change it, it's not slicing pie anymore. It's a different way.
Right. What are some of the things you can do? Like if a company's already up and running and they're at that negotiation table and they're like, they know it's not working their way around. They know it's not. So you got three guys. They know it's not 33, 33, 33 anymore. Is there a way to implement it after the fact? Is there a way to say, hey, we're already at the table here. We're already, this isn't working?
Yeah, that's a good question, and that's very common. So it's very common that someone comes to me and says, we started the company, we're 50-50, or a third, and it's not working. What do we do?" And one of the worst things you can do is buy out the slacker player. It breaks my heart to hear see buyouts of players that don't participate. But it's called a retrofit. And basically, you find a Zen-like place and you find a quiet and you recreate the past. And usually, startups aren't more than a year or two old, so it's fairly easy. And you just determine where you are equity-wise in terms of your bets, and then you just proceed from there. Now, if you find somebody who has an equity share that's larger than they deserve, all they really have is a legal right to be a dick. It's not fair. It's just you might have more than you deserve. Just last week, I was working with a company who, in a nutshell, the guy put $1 million in cash up, and his partners were going to do all the work. And they just did it 50-50. And the partners were drawing a salary from the $1 million. So here, these partners drawing his full salary and not taking any risk because they weren't making any bets because they're getting paid in full. And the draining the $1 million down, and yet they're 50-50. And sooner or later, the guy with $1 million says, this isn't right. These guys are dragging their feet on this project, and they shouldn't have 50%. If they don't pay them, they might have more or less. But if you're getting paid, you're not placing a bet. In fact, most of us work for a living. We get paid salaries, and we don't get any equity. That's because we're paid in full. So it goes south pretty quick. Once you realize you've made a mistake, unwinding it is pretty easy with using slicing pie, unless you have jerks on your team.
Yeah. It's been a little bit since I read it. I probably should have reviewed it this morning before I got in here. The way I remembered it was a certain multiple on cash and a certain multiple on time. And then with our team anyway, the way we use it is you had to be able to prove what you're worth. Like you had to show us that you charged X number of dollars per hour in the past. So you would show us like contracts or consulting things, and you show us what your going rate is, and that's what we logged you in as, right? There was some negotiation on some of that, and people got a little bit of leeway, but that's kind of how we did it. Is it, if I remember right, is 2x on your time and 4x on the money, or did I get it backwards there?
Yeah. So time and money aren't the same thing. So if I paid you $100 an hour to work for me, and you wanted to buy a thing that cost $100, it would
Hmm.
take you more than an hour to earn enough money. Because when I paid you, I'd pay employment taxes and social security taxes. When you receive the money, you pay income taxes. And when you bought the thing, you pay sales tax and VAT tax. So it might take you 2 hours to earn enough money. So for that reason, the buying power of cash is diminished after it goes through that process. So on a global basis, it's roughly 50% diminished over time. So some countries have no income tax, for instance, and some countries have a bigger income tax. But on a global basis, it's about 50%. So for that reason, if a dollar in non-cash is like your salary, your commissions, your royalties, your facilities, for instance, that you already own. And cash is basically unreimbursed expenses, cash out of pocket when it's consumed. So for that reason, I use a measurement called a slice, which is like a poker chip. It marks the fact that a bet took place. So you get 2 slices for every dollar in non-cash you put in, like time, and 4 slices for every dollar in cash you put in. And you could do 1 and 2. What I like about 2 and 4 is it obscures the underlying value of the contributions, because I know people think that the startup is worth what you contributed. You could invest $1 million in a startup and have it be worth nothing by obscuring it. But that way, when I take cash in the door, I think twice before I spend it because I give away 4 slices. So it smooths out the difference between the cash and non-cash. It aligns incentives and it just works better. Without those multipliers, then people are indifferent to cash. Then people would much rather not put in cash, and it's harder to attract without it.
And I got to experience that when we needed to contribute money into like legal expenses and stuff like that. I think we were a lot more. Like, I guess the word would be I want to use. I don't know if it's a great word, but frugal. We were a lot more cautious about who we hired, how much we paid them, and stuff like that, because we knew that those of us who contributed cash to it were getting 4 slices for that cash as opposed to 1 slice or 2 slices, for other stuff. So, I like the fact that I like the 4-2 model. I like the fact that, you have to think twice about wanting to spend somebody else's cash if it's not yours.
As you should. You should be making decisions based on sound financial stuff instead of guessing. So you mentioned the salary negotiation. People aren't going to work for free forever. They start a company, they don't get paid in the beginning. That's the way to finance. Basically, people finance their company by not paying. But eventually, they're going to want to get paid. And how much they get paid is their fair market value. So you want to know that up front before you get into the relationship. Otherwise, you're going to be stung later on. If you think you're worth $200,000, and I think you're worth $50,000, when it comes time to paying, we're going to have a big argument. But if you
Right.
set that in advance and it's based on logic, people are used to negotiating market rates. You can figure out how much a mouse is worth, right? You can figure out how much a microphone is worth. I can figure out how much a video editor is worth. But I can't figure out what the future value of my company is going to be worth.
So, that's one of the things. There's a point in the process I mess it up all the time. They would correct me in our group. We were using slicing pie. I'd say, "Okay, we're gonna hit this point where we're gonna be making money. It's time to cook the pie, right?" You're like, "No, it's called, I guess you call it freezing it. You freeze the pie."
It's
And I was like,
like
"Why would
baking the pie.
making the pie?" I'm like, "Why don't we cook the thing and eat it?" Because we joked around because we were doing a mergers and acquisition. We were building something to sell. So I was like, "I can't wait till we eat this pie," right? But, it was fun. It was a fun terminology too, the way you set it up. And, talk about the process of, like, okay, it's a startup, it hits a certain point of cash flow, and then the pie is it frozen or baked, or what do you call it in the book?
Freezing or baking. So the slicing pie is for the bootstrap stage. From concept stage, I tell people when they start the company in earnest, they start putting time and energy into the business in earnest. That's when they start keeping track of what they're putting in. And the things you keep track of are the same things most companies track anyway. Most companies track payroll and expenses. There's nothing new here to track. But it works through break even or Series A investment. And at that point, over time, as you get more revenue, you can start paying people their salary, paying their expenses, and the pie naturally stops accumulating slices. At that point, it freezes, and you issue common shares or whatever, and you go into your next round of funding, so this is a dilution, or if you raise Series A dollars. So once I have enough cash on hand to pay everybody's salary, then the equity freezes at that point. If I pay you from day one, then you'll get no equity because you made no bets.
Right, and so I was gonna say, could it be tiered? Like, for example, in our case, we had, 6 executives and a couple of us had assistants and stuff. We just paid the assistants, they didn't get slices,
Yeah, it's
right?
paying cash.
Yeah, just paid them from the start, and the money we paid was cash we contributed, so we got 4 slices for that payment. So I didn't know that I didn't I don't remember, like, who gets paid what, but I honestly think that in this grand scheme of things, if you've got 3 founders and you're starting to hire people, it's not everybody. You don't have to wait until you're so profitable that everybody stops getting slices. It could be, "Okay,
Right.
we're gonna anybody under this certain salary, we're not gonna give them equity, or maybe we give them a lot less equity and we're gonna give them pay," right? Can you do it
Yeah,
in level?
you have the choice. You can either pay them in cash if you have the cash, or you can pay them in slices if you don't. That's
Yeah,
the beauty of it. I can hire whoever I want. I can acquire whoever I need, and I always just pay cash if I can pay cash. If I can't pay cash, I can use slices, and that
yeah,
gives you basically an infinite amount of money to acquire things you need. Now, if the cost of starting a business is exorbitantly expensive, you might be in the wrong business. But
right.
for bootstrap companies, tech companies, they don't require a lot of cash. If you're starting a pharmaceutical company, you're going to need some major investment in front. But for the most part, during that bootstrap stage, slicing pie will fill the need.
Maybe we were butchering it a little bit too much, but we were looking at cases where, okay, this person would normally cost $80,000 a year. We're gonna bring them in. We're gonna pay him $35,000 a year, and we're gonna give them the other $45,000 in slices and they're gonna as we increase revenue, as things start to increase, we'll switch them all the way over. Is that normally done in the system, or
That's
did we
exactly right.
modify?
It's the unpaid portion of the fair market value. So if you buy a plane ticket for $1,000 and the company reimburses you 500, then the remaining 500 is your bet. If you're worth $50 an hour and I pay you $20 an hour, then you're only betting $30 an hour. So it's all back to the blackjack game. What are the bets on the table? I call it what's not what the risk is, what's at risk of loss.
So is this getting traction? I like it. I promote it all the time. Are the venture capitalist world, are they starting to pay attention to this?
Well, it doesn't really apply to VCs because by the time you get to the VCs, they're doing price round at that point.
Yeah,
I've never heard a situation where a VC said, "Oh gosh, you have a fair equity split in place. I'm not going to invest in you." It doesn't change. It changes nothing about equity deals. But as far as traction goes, it's used by thousands of startups all over the world. The book's been translated into a dozen different languages I'm launching it in Barcelona next month, and this new Spanish version is coming out. I have probably 60 or 70 lawyers I work with all over the world that implement Slicify. There's a company in Iran called slicingpie.ir that's translated the book and does it in Iran. I can't take any royalties out of Iran. I just tell them to donate it to charity. But it shows you that it works in literally any environment, any bootstrap company. It's a universal model because fairness is a universal construct. If we're brothers and our dad gives us a cookie, we split it at 50-50 because we're both paid exactly nothing to get it. So our only fair thing is to split it. Now, if it's your cookie, you can do whatever you want with it. You could steal my half, but that doesn't make it more fair. So fairness is a universal concept.
I have 2 kids, and what I always do is, like, if one of them cuts it, the other one gets to choose,
Right. And they're
right?
real careful how they cut it.
Yeah, they're real cautious at that point 'cause we're just getting to the age right now where we get to call shotgun. My daughter's old enough, she can ride in front. I still make her ride in the back most of the time. She's the younger of the 2, but, I don't like to hear the arguments, so, like, when we share anything, it's like, you cut the pie and he gets to choose his slice, or she gets to cut it and you get to choose your slice, and that puts a stop to that.
It's a basic instinct of fairness. They've done studies on monkeys, and monkeys can tell when things aren't being fair.
So, where do you go from this? I mean, you've got this out there. Are you expanding the model any? Have you changed anything since the initial concept, or
Well, the things that I have changed, the initial concept is stripping out the tweaks. I had a concept for using it for profit sharing, which in hindsight doesn't work very well, and how to treat contractors. Everyone needs to be treated the same way under the model. So what I've done is basically become more and more pure about how it is communicated. I did not invent fairness. Fairness has already existed. What I'm trying to do is interpret fairness for this part of our lives, which is business. Because we have the quantity, we can quantify business, we can quantify fairness. But it's taken on all over the world. Startups don't have a lot of money, so I don't make a ton of money on this venture, but I love it because it's one of the things I've done in my life that really has an impact on people's how people do things. The most common thing I get is, I wish I knew this 5 years ago before I started my last company. I wish I knew this 10 years ago. That's very common. People wish they had it, and when they find it, it's really refreshing because you can go once you have the model in place, you can go anywhere from there.
if you think about it, there's story after story after story where people wish they had this model. The one that keeps coming to my mind is Craig from Craigslist, right? He won't ever remember me, but I lived in San Francisco for a while. I actually went to one of his house parties. I won't describe the party, it was very awkward, but I went to one of his house parties. I think it was something held that he held, and I don't even think he came out but once or twice in the whole damn thing. But I got to meet him once. He had a founder that started with him, and I think the guy owned like 20 something percent or 20% of the company. He had told, I think it was, let's say eBay or PayPal. It was eBay, I believe, but PayPal eventually bought eBay, or eBay eventually bought PayPal. But it was one of the two. He told them no over and over again, and they finally figured out that this guy owned 20 something percent minority stake because he was one of the founders. Like, he helped Craig started it, but never didn't hang around, didn't do anything of it. But he had a piece, right?
Mm.
That guy sold to eBay, and there's huge stories about it. Made him so mad, you know. Had it been structured this way, I don't think the guy would have had it, because from the story, the guy didn't contribute what he was supposed to. It was one of these handshake deals at the beginning. He was in the room when the deal was made. He got 20%, and I think within the first year or two, he had left,
Yeah.
and way before it got big. And now he's made millions because he sold his chunk of something that ended up huge to somebody that the founder didn't want it sold to.
It's a mythology around it. It's a legends like the movies that are about corporations this is the crux of the Facebook movie. The crux of the deal was the equity split. There's a movie
Mhm.
that I share with my students every year. It's called Startup.com. It's a documentary about starting a company. Have you seen it?
Yeah, I've seen it. Yeah.
And the only person who makes any money in the whole deal is the guy who flaked out in the beginning and got bought out early on. So he stopped coming, stopped showing up to work, stopped participating, and they had to buy him out for like $800,000. With a slicing pie model, he would have gotten about $12,000.
Yeah. So, yeah, it's simple. It's simple enough that anybody can implement it, but it's revolutionary in the fact that nobody's done this in the history of business. We've been doing it the handshake model, fist bump model for so long, putting it on paper. And I like to consider myself a fairly intelligent guy. For the first 30 something, 40 something years of my life, I did equity splits. Like, I partnered with people over and over again. And a lot of the time, I can't say that I ever been really burned, but I've sold or got rid of a couple companies because I just couldn't deal with the partners anymore.
Right.
They owned too much of it. It wasn't making sense. I felt like I was doing all the work, and the only thing that I'd either have to buy them out, which didn't make sense, or walk away and watch them crash and burn the damn thing. And I've walked away from more than one.
Separation of partners is one of the most traumatic things that can happen to a startup. And in slicing pie, there's a set of rules for that too. So the betting thing is that I call it the allocation framework, but there's also the recovery framework. And there's four reasons why someone can leave a company. They can be fired for good cause, which means they're grossly negligent or they had a performance issue. And I always encourage people to do warning, warning, fired. If you're going to take someone's bet, you got to give them the opportunity to save it. They can be
Mhm.
fired for no good reason, which means they just got fired out of the blue. They can resign for good reason, which implies that the company made promises that it couldn't keep. So I might have said, well, I might say to you, I'll pay you a salary in 6 months. In 6 months, no salary materializes. Now you have good reason to resign. Or you're in charge of our marketing. Now you're going to clean toilets. That's something you signed up for. You have good reason to resign. Or we're moving to Seattle. Pack your bags. So startups are notorious for making promises they can't keep. But if you do that, you're giving someone a good reason to resign. Or they can resign for no good reason, means they just up and quit one day. If they're fired for no good reason, for good reason, for performance or negligence, or they up and quit on you one day, resign for no good reason, they are basically walking away from their bet. So just like in blackjack, if I walk up, get up from the middle of the table and walk away, the casino's not going to chase me down and give me my money back. The money's gone, the bet's gone, so I'm walking away. Just like a solo founder, if they get walked away from the business, they lose everything. So you lose everything if you walk away, except your cash contributions get paid back at later dates. So you don't want to imply you're stealing people's money. That causes extra problems. But if you're resigned for good reason or you're fired for no good reason, your bet stays on the table and converts to equity to everybody else. So with those, so no matter what decisions people make or how they act or what decisions are what they choose to do, it's impossible to get screwed because even if you get fired in the middle, your bet is still represented on the table. So whatever you contributed is reflected in your final share. So it's a screw-proof model. It always works.
Hey there, Hot Exit family. Today I'm thrilled to talk about Snowball, our incredible new sponsor. This community is more than just an investment hub, it's a place where growth is holistic. A private community where top entrepreneur investors share private deal flow, wins, tough lessons, strategies, get advice, and so much more. Snowball is a network rich with like minded, experienced entrepreneurial minds, including investors, founders, CEOs, and doers all dedicated to meaningful growth. Snowball threads are like a daily masterclass. This isn't just about financial success, it's about enriching your entire life. If you're looking for a community that supports your entire entrepreneurial journey with shared wisdom and collective support, check out www.snowballclub.com. I believe their approach to compounded growth in wealth, health, network, and relationships could be the game changer you've been seeking. Let's grow together with Snowball. It's brilliant in the fact that, like, just say I come into a company and we all have to contribute some cash. You and I create a business, right? You put 100K in, I put 100K, right? You put in 100 hours, I put in 100 hours. And let's say we're both worth $200 an hour, right? We both put the same amount of time in. You think it's unfair when something happens and I've got a better idea and I got to leave. You and I aren't working out, and we come to a mutual agreement that I'm leaving, and it's for good. It's for you want. We both want to agree. You're going to let me leave for good reason, right? So my stuff freezes at that point, and you continue to put in time and stuff. Your equity continues to grow.
Right.
So when it comes time to sell, it's fair because my 100,000 and I think I said 100 hours is now only after 4 years. It's probably only worth 10% of the total, or you continue to grow, you continue to contribute, you continue to bring on other people. They continue to get slices. The pie starts to, you know, be sliced up more and more. And while the difference in value would be if I had you buy me out that day at the current value would probably be less than it would when it grew. It's not unfair, right? It's
Right.
an investment. It's like I bought stock at that early stage and I get to see how far it goes.
Exactly what you're doing. It's exactly what you're doing. People often confuse stock compensation for real compensation, but I always encourage people to think of those things as totally separate. You get paid a salary or you get equity. If you owned Apple Computer shares and you went to work for Apple Computer, they said, "Good news, we found out you owned Apple Computer shares, so we're not going to pay your salary." That'd be ridiculous. People think they're getting you basically free in a startup. You're foregoing current compensation for equity in the real world, you spend your current you get paid and you spend it on stock in the stock market. So it's the same kind of investment. This is just determining what that is. As far as determining value of the shares for a buyout, it's impossible because the company is usually worth zero. and people usually aren't qualified to value themselves. So this way, it always makes sense. And also, you don't want to put the company in a position that has to be forced to pay out money. The money should be going to building the business, not people's pockets. So if I have to do a buyout, that means you got to come up with the cash to buy someone out who's not contributing anymore. That's a huge waste of money. It should be going to marketing and product development.
So, going back to the mergers and acquisitions world, for me as a buyer, if I came to a company and I find out you've been running it for 5 years and you've been running under the slicing pie model, I'm more interested in the company because right now, I'll tell you right now, if I come up to a company and I know I've interviewed 200 people, I meet with 2 dozen people every 2 weeks, different ones all the time. So I've probably interacted with 5 or 600 people over the last 2 or 3 years. I'll tell you, most of us, if there's more than 3 founders or more than 3 people, we don't proceed with the deal,
Mm.
mainly because of getting alignment and unfairness and all this stuff, but if I think I would look further if I find out, like, look, oh, they've been running the whole thing for slice with the slicing pie model, and mainly because now I know that the voting rights go with those slices, right? The
Right.
guy who has the most skin in the game and the most there's gonna be somebody in dominant control, and there's been a sense of equity and fairness from the start. There's a lot of animosity in companies that was third, third, third. At the end, I've never seen one where everybody thinks everybody equally did equal, right? Maybe 2 people, but, when you get 3 or 4 more, there's always somebody they just don't feel carried their way.
It's tough. If both companies are using slicing pie and you want to merge, just add your pies together, and you got a perfect
Mhm.
split without any, there's no question. If the companies are not using slicing pie because they're cash flow break even, then they are valuable in the sense they can be valued, and you can measure the value of that company through valuations techniques. But if they're both startups, they can just add the pies together. Sometimes it works out. Sometimes people don't realize that it's not working out. They don't realize that they're getting burned, especially in the beginning. So one common mistake people make is they think that their equity equals their compensation, so they'll split what's left over. But you got to get paid first before you can get your dividends paid.
Yeah, there's been times where I've had business partners that at the beginning, it was great. We were both pulling 30, 40-hour weeks, 50-hour weeks, but over time, one or the other finds other interest or loses the fire for the game, and there's still stuff to be done. So
Yeah,
now you bring in a third person because the other guy, he just can't keep up with his work, and you start to question, is he not keeping up because he's not keeping up, or is there more work? Is there more? If you start looking at the logic of it, there's not more units of work. He's just less proficient at doing the units.
right.
So
And
there's this animosity that builds up, and
so
this solved that problem.
you just give the person a warning and say we expect you to do X, Y, Z, and then the warning looks like a discussion. It's like what is causing you the blockage? Well, I need a better, faster computer. All right, well, that's reasonable. We can get you that. So a few more weeks goes, but if the behavior persists, then it's another conversation. Well, I need better software, so that's reasonable. We can get you that. Third time though, it's you. It's not the accommodation. But people have plenty of warning that they're going to get fired, and they get fired. So be it. They didn't care about the business anyway, so why should they care about having stock?
Yeah, I'm a big fan of there's all employees are great employees. Just some of them would be better employees for other companies, right? You're like, I don't believe in bad employees. believe in you're in the right seat in the wrong seat, and sometimes your seat's somewhere else. I'm sure you're a great employee for somebody else. I say that most of us entrepreneurs make horrible employees for somebody else.
One of my first experiences when I was promoting slicing pie back in the early days, about 10 years ago, I came across a guy whose CTO had been hit by a bus and subsequently died of his injuries. And his wife inherited his half of the company. But she had no skills whatsoever. She couldn't contribute. She had no intention or interest in contributing. I don't blame her, but she didn't want to give her shares up. And I don't blame her. But with slicing pie, he was without slicing pie, he was stuck giving her half the profits forever, even though he had to hire somebody else and give him a share out of his share. It was a mess. They eventually went out of business. With slicing pie, that would be termination with good reason. Resignation for good dying is a good reason to resign. So his wife would have inherited his slices, and they would have continued to dilute naturally as the person took on another partner. So that company would have gone forward in the wake of that tragedy. But he felt bad for her and everything else, and it's very sensitive. But slicing pie model gives you an answer to that question: what to do.
Yeah, even if they say, "Well, I wanna hold on to the shares, I wanna watch it go," great, you understand that the company's gonna go around if your part freezes, right? And even if they're at the point where the company's given cash distributions on a quarterly basis to the shareholders, that eventually would potentially, if the company's growing and growing, their monthly payment wouldn't necessarily go lower, but it wouldn't be in percentage of the rest of the company, right? It wouldn't be
Well, they have what they
25%.
deserve. They have what they
Yeah.
deserved. I tell people I charge. $300 an hour for consulting. If they don't pay me that $300 for that consult, then I'm betting $300 on their company. So that's my 600 slices. Now they might have 6 million slices at the end of when they break even. So I get my 0.001%. When you go public in 10 years, I get a check for $10,000 that reflects my share of the risk
Mhm.
at that moment in time. And it's
Yep.
perfectly fair because that's what it was. That's what it was. That's what I earned.
How long did it take you to come up with this? 'Cause, like I said, it seems overly simple that it works, but it's also very well thought out. It's really it really you start to wonder why other people do other things other than this. Once you read it and look at it, look at the model you built, why does somebody do anything else? How long did this like, what was the process for you to come up with this? Did it take months, a year, or
Well, the original white paper I sat down and wrote in a few days. I just kind of had some idea, and I had done versions of this before. I initially did it based on dollar amounts. Time and cash is the same thing, and I had a rough agreement in place with one of those companies I started. And I actually had a guy sue me for back pay. He showed up for 2 weeks and didn't do any work and just stopped coming to work. Then he sent me a bill for $8,000. I didn't have $8,000 to give him, so he sued me and went to a mediation. And the mediator took one look at it and said, "This is clear what it says," and I didn't have to pay him because he walked away. So that was clear. But the magic that makes it work is two things. One is the normalizers, the multipliers that I use to normalize cash and non-cash. At the time, I wasn't using cash. There's multipliers, so everyone just assumed I'd spend my money instead of their money. So I used up all my life savings in order to fund the company. If I'd used the multipliers, people would have been more willing to put their cash in. The other thing that's changed is I've become better at describing how it works. In the beginning, I wasn't very good at describing how it works. So that blackjack example was actually from one of my readers who gave that to me on the phone one day. He said, "This is how I think of it." So it's sharpening my skills at describing the model.
yeah. So what are some of the bigger do you have any companies out there that you know are using this or created off this that you're able to talk about?
See, I used to try to track that, but people don't discuss their financing very often, and people don't call authors of the book and tell them. I hear anecdotally there are some companies out there that did use Slicify in the beginning. That there's some project management software out there. There's some big project management software out there. There's a lot of breweries use it. A lot of companies use it. It's hard for me to pinpoint and give good case studies. There are some on my website case studies from companies that use it who are successful.
Give me a scale, like, are you in the tens of thousands of books sold, or is it, like, that's been pretty popular?
I've sold hundreds of thousands of books all over the world. For a while there's the Chinese version was outselling globally all the other versions. Yeah, the book
It's
sold
awesome.
at a fairly steady pace for the past 10 years. But
It's
I'm
awesome.
always kind of trying to refresh it. I'm working on a hardcover version now.
It's awesome in the fact that I look at that there was a self-serving reason I asked that because the more books you sell, the more commonplace this is, and the more times when I decide to start the next thing or when I talk to somebody about this, the more likely they are to know what it is and be willing to implement it right away, right?
Yeah.
The better you're successful, the easier my path is in the future. So,
Yeah, it hasn't gone like wildfire yet. It hasn't gone mainstream yet, but I find when I talk to people at events and around, about 15% of people have heard about it in these circles. If you spend a lot of time in startup circles, you're bound to have heard about it, at least on the surface. There's three kinds of people who don't like slicing pie. The first kind of person doesn't get it. If somebody says they don't like slicing pie, it's usually because it hasn't clicked with them yet. So I have games and books and spreadsheets and all kinds of things, and online course, that kind of stuff. The second kind of person is someone who's not willing to learn, and I always suggest you avoid those people. So someone who's not willing to learn something new, so just do it the old way. This is how I've always done it. That's the second kind of person who doesn't like slicify. The third person who doesn't like slicify is someone who does get it, but it's their intention to take advantage of you. And I see desperate entrepreneurs all the time that take money they shouldn't, get in partnerships they shouldn't. I always tell people if it's a good deal, you'll find the money. If it's not a good deal, then you probably shouldn't have the money in the first place. So as long as your deal's good, it'll be okay. But besides those three reasons, there's no reason not to use slicing pie.
inside of the mergers and acquisition realm, where do you see we talked a little bit about, okay, we implementing this after the fact. Is there a way to and I guess once you're profitable, everything's frozen. So it's mostly just for startups. I love the concept of this, but a lot of my merger and acquisition guys, they don't get the realm that they're kind of a startup when they're doing roll ups and stuff like that because they're putting together a team. Maybe they're raising capital, but they technically may or may not, depending on how they raise that capital, should be paying themselves out of it. And if it's a search fund and they've negotiated inside of the search fund, a salary for themselves and their staff, that's one thing. But a lot of times when we raise funds for acquisitions, unless you explicitly state, "I'm gonna pay myself this and my team X, Y, and Z," that's not normal. So we're expected to bring some skin to the game and to kind of put this thing together out of our without a soft, cushy salary to go through.
Right.
So that's one of the reasons I keep recommending this book. Like, look, you say you're going to do a roll up, you're going to pull it together a team of 4 or 5 people. Here's how you figure out what, and these are big projects. A lot of times these roll ups are tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of dollars on the exit value. And you're buying profitable companies. So it's the less likely that it will fail if you can successfully pull it off. As like that was a kind of counterintuitive statement, right? It's less likely to fail if you can pull it off.
Yeah.
But you're buying profitable companies. So long as you get started, you have something profitable to sell on the other end.
Right. So
But
what I tell people is Slicing Pie is a financing tool. It's a financing tool like a loan is a financing tool, a credit card is a
mhm,
financing tool, a convertible note is a financing tool, a safe is a financing tool, a VC round is financing. It's just ways of financing things. So it's for the team that's financing themselves by not paying themselves, by not paying for expenses. Not paying for something is a way to finance a business. So in a merger and acquisition, you may finance the capital to buy that business differently than you finance the team. So to finance the team uses slicing pie, but the loan you take out or the equity round you raise for the acquisition could be a different form of financing. So I can go out and raise have a $10 million fund that the management of that fund is its own entity, is its own pie, and deploying the fund is its own pie. So I can still use slicing pie for the management of it, and the management will get a percentage of the deal, which will be shared among the slicing pie holders.
I love the software. We use your software too. So we put our time and our money in it, like at least I think once a week, at least minimum. I just did it as I used it, right? Kind of as we went. But we put our time and stuff in. And any given time, at least for me, because I was one of the executive, I could go in and see the size of the pie. Like I could see what the pie looked like, how many shares there were, what my percentage of it was. There were reports in there that I could see, and it really kind of gave you, and I could see maybe because I was an executive in the company, but I could see other people's too, and it gave me the ability to go, okay, well, we need to go talk to Steve. He's putting in more. You know, what we had, we I won't. I just made up a name, called it Steve because we didn't have a Steve on the team. I did that on purpose. There wasn't a Steve on our team, but there we had a person on there that they were putting in. We needed them to explain the hours they were putting in the software because it didn't match up with what we were seeing.
Right. So that's the beauty of it. Due diligence is great.
Yeah,
One thing to keep in mind is slicing pie doesn't replace good management. You still have to be a good
yeah,
manager and be on the ball. But
yeah.
at least you have the information you need. In the software is kind of like accounting program for money you don't spend, or QuickBooks is accounting software for money you do spend. About 5 years after writing the book, people said you should have an app for this. So that's why I created the app. There's actually a secret feature in that software you may not be aware of. If you go to the settings screen, you click on performance management. There's a whole set of features for setting goals and milestones for individuals that work in Slicing Pie. So that's another topic that I talk about and will work for pies: how to set up programs. People often think that equity is an incentive program. Equity doesn't cause motivation, it reflects motivation. The only reason you'd take equity in a company is if you believed in it. If you didn't believe in it, you wouldn't take equity. So I can give you equity that won't motivate you, but if you're motivated about the business and the vision anyway, you'll want equity. So giving it willy nilly doesn't work, but putting milestones in place, putting good management in place, people will take it because they believe in the business.
And I think he didn't charge enough. Be honest, at least when we were using it, the software was way too cheap. When they told me what the software charged, like what that just doesn't make sense because the value it gave us was way more than the price. So I don't know if you've raised the price in the last 2 years, but I was a little shocked at how affordable.
Entrepreneurs don't have a lot of money.
I guess we're in a little different realm because we're all seasoned entrepreneurs, have done deals, sold businesses before. We're contributing cash. We're doing acquisitions and mergers. We might be a different group of
Yeah.
people. We're not straight out of college trying to create the next Apple in our garage, right? A lot of us are even semi-retired and doing this for fun. Like
I
this
got,
is our monopoly. We're using our real money.
yeah,
So
I got users in China in different countries that the cost of living is much different too.
yeah. But I appreciate it. It was really cool, and I was just like, because I thought it was a typo because we had our own, like, little expense reports, and when I seen the software cost, because I didn't that wasn't my I was marketing and sales. When I seen the expense thing that's over the software, like, "That's wrong, right, it's more than that, right?" Like, "No, that's what it costs." I was like, "Okay,"
Right now it's like
you know,
$20 a month.
yeah, that's where I didn't wanna say because I didn't want you to change, but I almost called you because we had that call,
Oh,
I
I'm gonna
almost said
change it.
Like it should be. We There was software we're using that was 195 a month or something. That would be, with what we was doing and you're managing, you're pretty much, if you look at the VC world, you created a cap table for like in what a VC world or a startup world would call a cap table for the investors and the contributors, like who owns what portion of it, for people who didn't know what a cap table was. Like
Yeah.
in the grand scheme of things, that software could be 195 a month.
There's a lot of cap table software out there that works great when the stock has a price.
Hmm.
If the stock didn't have a price, it's a totally different ballgame. So my software ends where theirs picks up. There's probably a dozen different companies. I actually partner with one called Revester in the Netherlands. They have Scientify tools built into their software. But that software, it requires a price in order to make it work. And without the price,
Yeah.
you're just guessing. You
Yeah,
share
the
price.
strike price. Yeah, yeah, the strike price, the share price. So, what do you want people to know about the book? What are the give us a couple of highlights to get people to go out and buy this thing?
Well, the important thing to remember is that it works because it's based on facts. Fairness is not a matter of opinions, it's a matter of facts. And the facts are easily observable in the marketplace. We can see what things are worth. We can see what things are bet. We can see what people's risk is. It's not ambiguous. There's no way to game it. There's no way to cheat it. There's no way to break it if you use it properly. So if you're starting a business with a partner and you're not paying each other, you need to use the slice and pie model. Literally anything else you do is going to wind up backfiring because it's going to lead to an unfair split. On the off chance you can get it right by guessing, it's going to be wrong the minute something changes. So I don't want people to be intimidated by it or think it's going to favor one person over the other. I deal with customers all the time. I've done thousands of phone calls with startups, and people are always worried that it might not accommodate things. It accommodates every eventuality your business might come into. And it's because it's a dynamic program that self adjusts based on what the logic of fairness is, not on any external opinions or subjective thoughts. So it always works, and there's lots of ways to use it for free if they want to. But they, of course, can buy the books and buy the software and that kind of stuff. But that big mission in life is make sure that this thing goes mainstream. You can do all kinds of stuff with it if you do it right.
I like to say a lot of people don't get this, but I say startups or partnerships of any kind in business or like marriage, a lot of times you spend more time with your startup partner than you actually do with your spouse. And just like marriages, they're all going to start with love and fondness. I wouldn't start a business with you if I didn't think I liked you, could spend time with you, and work with you, right?
Yeah, I've had
Just like
prenups.
marriage.
Slice and Pie was the basis of a prenup once.
Yeah, there you go. And then the startups either end in one or two ways. Either you sell it, you're profitable, or it ends up in a divorce. And I don't know too many divorcees that really like each other, right? I've started so many companies, and most of them started with people I considered either very knowledgeable that were my friends, or I thought we were going to be great friends because they had knowledge and we got along. I can tell you right now, in my 52 years, I'm only probably friends with two or three people that I've been in business with that long enough that we sold the business or did something with, and we're no longer in business with each other anymore. Most of them ended up where we may still talk to each other, but we're nowhere near as close as we were. It
Right.
really stressed that friendship, and I think your book and what you're doing will change that. I honestly think that people will be able to enter knowing it's equitable and fair and leave knowing it was equitable and fair. And there's no anything that was other than that was illogical, meaning that they might feel that they're treated unfair, but it's not true, right? A lot of times people feel things that aren't real.
Yes,
So
that's especially true in families. There's two brothers are going together, or a husband and wife team, and I say, do slicey pie. I know you're feeling generous. You don't want to use your brother, nickel and dime 'em, but get it in place because that way you'll stay friends.
yeah, I think you're gonna save a lot of relationships out there. You probably even save some marriages if you get married couples that are going to business together. A lot of
Especially with a
time.
third partner. If there's a husband and wife and a third partner, then it's a lot of conflict.
Yep.
But as you
You know,
use slicey pie, it's all transparent.
So I think you're gonna save a lot of relationships in the future, and you probably already have. And maybe there needs to be a mechanism for maybe that's the call out. If you're out there and you've used his book and it's saved your relationship, or you're really, really glad, reach out and tell him, because I think authors need more of that. I think authors need more of, hey, I use what you've done, what you've taught. I've really used it. It's really made a big difference in my business and my life, and I just wanted you to know it. I get that from the podcast occasionally, but it's not as common as you would expect. Out of the thousands and thousands of download, still, once a week or something, somebody will send me an email. Hey man, I'm really glad you're doing what you're doing. It's teaching me a lot. I'm using it. But it's not out of the thousands of people that that's it's working for and it's helping. you don't get that feedback. And we
Right.
have mechanisms and podcasts for it to be there. The books just don't have that necessarily.
Yeah, it's hard. People don't usually call authors of their books, tell them what happened.
I'll reach out to them. I love authors. I put this, you're probably the 40, I think we're at 48 or maybe even close to 50 authors that have been on the show out of 200, mainly because you've got enough knowledge, you took the time and put it down, and I'm able to look through it and see what is there. And honestly, I know that if you wrote a book, you want the word out. So it's kind of a fairly easy target to get authors on a show like this because you got to get the word out about the book. But I didn't realize I'd done so many authors. It wasn't intentional, to be honest. I did a thing called Meet the Author where I was like, we were promoting some of the older shows, like going back and promoting them. So we started creating graphics for Meet the Author. And when I got to my 47th, like, man, I've interviewed a lot of authors. I didn't realize a lot of them, but I interviewed people, didn't realize they had 2 books out. Right. But I'm a big fan of authors. I love people who capture their knowledge, put it down, allow other people to use it. There's a contribution to the world you're giving. And I want to, if nobody's thanking you, I do want to thank you. It has made a difference in our businesses. I won't enter into business structures that's not using something similar to it. They may not call it that, but you know, if I pitch them the book and they tell me no, I'll pitch it from another angle and they'll still use the methodology. Right? Like, okay, maybe we don't use slicing pie, but let's just do a thing where if I put money in, it's worth X, and if I put time in, it's worth the Y. Can we agree upon that? And now they lower that bar down to having to read a book and follow somebody else's model, but
I,
it's still the model.
I have a 12-page guide you can give to someone who doesn't get it right away.
So how does people reach out to you? How do people get that? And how people? I know that you can go to Amazon and look for Slice and Pie, and We'll Work for Pie, and the other. Look up your name. You got some other books out, but what would be your preferred method for people to reach out to you?
Well, I have about a dozen different books I've written. It's MikeMoyer.com is where I keep information about those books about trade shows and presentation skills and lacrosse and stuff like that. And then
I thought I
slicing.
seen something by lacrosse, and I was like, "Is that a different guy?"
No, it's
Nope,
me.
it's you. Cool.
That was
Okay.
my COVID book I wrote with my son.
Okay.
And slicingpie.com is where the slicing pie stuff is found. You can download a free sample. And if you contact me through the contact link, I'll send you that free guide. It's called the Co-Founder's Guide to Equity Splits. Like I say, if you find someone doesn't get it, then I'm there to teach it to them. There's a course online, all kinds of stuff. If they don't want to use it because they want to take advantage of you, that's a different issue.
Awesome. Well, I wanna thank you for being here today. I think we covered this, and I'll continue to recommend your book on to when I get guests on the show and they're talking about starting something new. There's only, to be honest, it's not a wide variety. For buying businesses, I tell people to read, I don't totally draw it, like Buy Then Build. And then for negotiations, I always tell them to never split the difference. When to outsource and when to do stuff, it's always who, not how, Dan Sullivan. And when they start talking about starting something new and they're like going to create like a startup or a roll up or whatever, I was like, you got to read Slicing Pie and you got to implement it. It's what's going to keep, it's going to save that relationship. You want to be friends with your brother-in-law in 2 years after this business is going. Read this book, implement it. It'll save your first friendship. It'll save your relationship, and it'll save a lot of frustration. So I promote your book constantly, and I'll continue to do that.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
All right. Thank you. We'll call that a show. Hang out for just a second. I want to announce our new channel partners, the ITX Marketplace. Since 1998, ITX has created $5 billion in value by selling more than 225 IT businesses in 20 countries. ITX works exclusively with IT-enabled businesses generating between 5 million and 30 million who are ready to be sold, and M&A decision makers who are ready to buy. For over 25 years, ITX has developed industry knowledge that helps determine whether a seller is a good fit for their buyers before making the match. ITX Mergers and Acquisition Marketplace we have partnered with has a proprietary database of 50,000 plus global buyers seeking IT service firms, managed service providers, Microsoft service providers, software as a service platforms, and channel partners with Microsoft, Oracle, ServiceNow, and the Salesforce space. If you have an IT enabled business you're ready to sell, I want you to visit the itexchangenet.com/marketplace. How to exit. That link will be in the show notes. Visit them now.